What is wrong with Los Angeles? That's what many are asking these days. Out of control wildfires in January 2025, the worst homeless crisis in the U.S., concerns about increasing crime, transportation and housing problems, city budget and finances a mess, lack of leadership. These are just some of the issues critics say are plaguing Los Angeles these days. We're going to be joined later in the broadcast with a Los Angeles journalist known to many as the LA Watchdog to discuss all the LA money stuff, the finances. First, though, joining me now is former Los Angeles Sheriff Alex Villanueva. Sheriff Villanueva has now joined the fight as an advocate to keep officials accountable, and that, for that matter, the media as well. Sheriff Villanueva, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, David, for having me.
We've got a lot to talk about. Sheriff Villanueva, let's begin with LA homelessness. You were the boots on the ground for many years here in LA. You know this all too well. Skid Row, MacArthur Park, the fentanyl crisis, the list goes on. What many claim are the bogus Los Angeles Housing Services Authority reports, those LAHSA reports you know all about, where some of these city and county leaders, I don't know how they're saying, Sheriff, claiming homelessness is a horrific crisis that's actually improving. The question is, are things improving?
They're not improving at all. In fact, they're actually becoming cemented as part of our urban landscape to the point now where you can't really separate these third world apparitions everywhere, and they're intruding further and further into what used to be normal neighborhoods or business districts. And when you have a governor, you had the board of supervisors, the city council, the mayor, all saying, hey, we have it under control, just trust us and send us more money. It really screams no, the exact opposite is what's happening.
To your point, it just seems like they keep throwing money at the problem, and it's just become this vicious cycle of nothing getting better.
That is very true. I mean, from 2011 to 2021, the county alone spent $6.5 billion on homeless initiatives. And during that 10-year time span, the homeless population doubled in size. Just think about that. We threw all this money and the problem got twice as bad. A normal, prudent business person or anybody with a sense of common sense would say, you know what? Let's stop what we're doing in our tracks because we're going in the opposite direction we need to go. Let's regroup and rethink this thing. That never, ever happened because along the way, it was the creation of the homeless industrial complex. It was a birth of just, a cornucopia of nonprofits and non-NGOs, non-governmental organizations dedicated to receiving public money. Not so much fixing something that would put them out of business, but let's just keep all that money coming in terms of grant money from the feds, from the state, the county, the city level. And there you have a birth of an industry, but you don't have the solution of a problem.
And I talk to hundreds and hundreds of people every year. Obviously, we're out on many stories. Every resident in LA, every business leader, every homeless expert I interview has said the problem, as you say, is getting worse. So the question is, where is the leadership? You mentioned the city, you mentioned the county. Where is the responsibility? Where's the accountability on the part of these city and county folks, to try and solve this homeless crisis? I say that because I know back in the day, some years back, a few years ago, you had a plan which the leaders, the LA politicians, everyone else, they sort of condemned you. You were demonized and vilified. They were saying, you're criminalizing the homeless. And you take a look at the problem now and seemingly nothing is being done. Yes, we've got to care for the homeless, but we continue to have the worst homeless crisis in the U.S., Sheriff.
That is very true. And some of the sins of the strategies of these politicians is enabling dependency. Sin number one. And sin number two is normalizing deviancy. When you do those things with taxpayer money, all you're guaranteeing is you're going to have more people that join the fray. They want the free handout, want the permissive environment where they can consume all the drugs they want and they don't have to worry about anything. And that personal agency is gone. Any sense of self-worth or responsibility is gone. And all of their solutions only guarantees that more people want a piece of that. It does not solve the problem. So the entire drama that's unfolding here in LA is, I don't know if it's by design. I shudder to think it was by design, but the reality is their theory is just bad. the equation, the formula is bad from the very onset. It's bad because everything, if you hear the county supervisor in particular talk, they always say, oh, we just got to offer services. Oh, let's give more services. And somehow they can cure that, lack of personal responsibility by throwing taxpayer funded services. We can cure criminality by just giving these people services. They're not really crooks. They're victims of society at large. And that mentality of just throwing more services means, well, someone's going to pay for it. So let's start dismantling the public safety infrastructure, and we can shift the money towards all these nonprofits. And the same nonprofits are the one that toot the horns of the supervisors, the mayor, the city council, offer them volunteers for their campaigns, donate to their campaigns lavishly. So you have this vicious cycle that feeds itself. And we're creating this perfect storm of incompetence and corruption centered around nonprofit world that's somehow going to cure something that they created and they have no intent of ever solving. Because if they fixed it, they're gone. There's no need to have all of these nonprofits.
What is a solution then? We don't want to criminalize it where, you're ripping people off the streets and throwing them in jail, obviously, but we have to save the city and we have to save homeless folks from themselves, and something must be done. What is a solution, Sheriff?
Well, we already found the solution and it worked. And I can point to Venice as a prime example of that. Our homeless outreach service team did the outreach, did assessment. We had over 200 people living in tents on the boardwalk, destroying the entire business environment of Venice. The number 2 tourist draw in all of Southern California after Disneyland is a Venice boardwalk. And the county and the city was willing to just give it away to the homeless because they wanted a virtue signal and basically say, oh, look how virtuous we are. We just need to understand them and coddle them and give them services. And somehow they're going to become, law-abiding, responsible citizens. They're going to care for themselves. They're smoking crack on that one. What we have to do is, obviously, we have to provide emergency shelter for those that don't have a roof overhead. No problem there. For those that are suffering from mental illness, substance abuse, get them housing, get them the treatment they need for that. And the ones that are here, which is the bulk of the rest, you know what? Get off the street, get into emergency shelter, or get the hell out of LA. We don't need you here destroying our community. No, the free loading and the free times are over for that crowd. And now the Supreme Court has arrived at that same conclusion and supports what I was putting into play back in Venice, back in San Vicente in front of the VA hospital, on Placito Olvera, for example, in downtown LA, and all the other places in LA County that we went. We cleaned up the place, we returned it, regulating public space, giving it back to the community so it was used the way it was intended. Sidewalks are for walking, and these are common sense things that need to happen. And you know what? It is rule of law. I'm sorry. If you don't like it here, leave. It's as simple as that. But we should not make it a way of life that is acceptable.
Speaking of rule of law, the other thing that folks constantly tell me when I'm out on my stories is we're worried about crime. I'm not sure why LA is failing where crime is concerned. You were a tough on crime kind of guy. Today everyone with the city keeps saying, well, crime is getting better, the stats are improving. However, to be honest, I don't want to get at an issue with the city and the county. However, every person I interview, that's sort of my litmus test. They say otherwise. Residents tell me they're greatly concerned about their safety, whether they're on the streets, they're in their homes, or on the metro buses and subways. Is there a disconnect somewhere between the city and county and the average folks out on the street who are telling me they're worried?
Well, one thing is they stopped counting crime. The statistics are no longer reliable because people, one, are not reporting crime. Cops show up and they say, well, there's nothing we can do. A lot of citizens have figured, well, why bother? Because, after all, it's just a property loss. Nothing's going to be done about it. You have businesses that don't report being robbed. Unless somebody gets hurt or something egregious, you even have robberies that are not being reported anymore because they say, why bother? No one's going to do anything about it. So that mentality has made the reporting of crime totally unreliable, the statistics unreliable. So when you hear politicians say, oh, look, property crimes are down, I'd say automatically that is garbage. Property crimes have accelerated because I have people working in retail telling me people walk in and out every hour of every day in supermarkets taking whatever they want. And it's a free-for-all. And I think with the passage of Prop 36 and with Hochman, it looks like we might have turned the corner on that part, but statistics takes a long time to catch up to people's perceptions. So any politician telling you that everything is improving and down, they're full of it.
Let's get away from the homeless and crime, and let's talk policy. You had mentioned policy a moment ago. You have been critical of Mayor Bass, the county board of supervisors, now talking policy, the politics of all. What is going wrong with those folks, in your opinion? Obviously, many have argued that LA City, LA County, the politicians, for years it's sort of just been the same old, same old. You know what I'm saying, Sheriff? Sort of like they never recognize their mistakes. They seemingly never take a different path of action. There's no change. What is going on with the policy in the City of Angels?
Well, I can focus. Let me actually direct it towards the county, because actually the county policy making has a lot more to do with the region than city policy. I mean, city, you always have the scandal of developers too friendly with the city council people and pushing through projects they probably shouldn't build. I mean, look at Venice. They're going to put a homeless shelter on the beach in prime real estate, when you can house 10 times the amount of people by moving the project just 5 or 10 miles inland. What is the sense in doing that? They want to do the same with Marina del Rey. It makes no sense financially, politically, community-wise, because no one wants that there. Yet they seem obsessed with doing that, pushing these projects that no one wants for some idea of, look how virtuous we are. Everyone deserves a home next to the beach. I mean, this is insane. But going to the county, most importantly, in this prior to the advent of Mark Ridley Thomas getting a seat on the Board of Supervisors, you had somewhat of a balance between liberal and conservative voices. You had a 3-2 split, a 2-3 split, but everyone on there, even the most liberal, were fiscally pretty conservative. They were cautious. They didn't engage in any experimental anything with the budget or creating new bureaucracies. They're very loath to do that. And the county budget was relatively stable. All of the public safety infrastructure was fully funded. There was never no drama. For Mark Ridley Thomas's appearing on the board in 2008 and Sheila Kuehl, that was the beginning of the end of responsible county government, because it became a supermajority far-left progressive board. And they said, hey, let's create a Justice Care and Opportunities Department. Let's get rid of Probation Department. Let's defund the Sheriff's Department. Let's remove all these things that actually keep people alive and safe, all for the sake of pursuing progressive ideology. That was the beginning of the end. So when these fires came in 2025, we don't have enough deputies to do evacuations. We don't have emergency management capacity because we kind of squandered it all away. We don't have water in our fire hydrants. Wait, we don't have a reservoir with water in them when they're supposed to be. We don't have fire engines for all the firemen that need to fight fires. All the basics were neglected in pursuit of progressive ideology. Look at the budget, look at the priorities. You can trace it back for the county from 2008. For the city side, pretty similar. You're going to have the same ideological push. Heck, look at the Metropolitan Transit Authority. They have an advisory committee that recommended unanimously to get rid of law enforcement on all of the MTA systems. That will tell you how far progressive ideology has intruded into local government.
Sheriff Villanueva, we're going to have you back on this program in about a month or so to continue our series, What is Wrong with LA? Is there a solution? Thank you so much for this interview. Thanks for being here.
You got it, David.
And now joining us is Jack Humphreville. Jack is known as the LA Watchdog, and if you live in LA, well, you're probably familiar with his CityWatch news column. Safe to say Jack has not made many friends at City Hall. Well, for that matter, neither has Sheriff Villanueva nor I, possibly because we're just trying to keep the politicians honest. Jack Humphreville, thank you so much for being here.
It was a pleasure to see you, David.
We have got to talk finances. You are the LA watchdog. I've heard you repeatedly say, Jack, that the LA City budget, the finances are, in your words, now, make no mistake, your words, not mine, a train wreck. Can you be more specific?
They are a train wreck, and that's probably an understatement. Basically, over the last several years, the city has entered into what I call budget-busting labor agreements, and they're unsustainable. They're not financed. There's no basis for them other than the union bosses, call the shots for their puppets at City Hall, whether it's the mayor or whether it's the members of the city council. And to give you an example, the city is looking at a $1 billion deficit for the upcoming fiscal year, and I'm not sure how they're going to solve that problem. The reason behind it, as one, is that they had the budget busting labor agreements, and those are accompanied by overly optimistic revenue projections that just don't have any basis in fact. They then also underestimate expenditures, whether they're for the police and the fire departments. And the other one that's the real monster this past year and the upcoming year are the liability claims for legal judgments and settlements. And the past show you how unrealistic they were. They budgeted about 87 million, call it 100 million for round numbers, and the number is coming in at 300 million. So that's a $200 million deficit. The revenue projections were that they had in the forecast that was developed by the city administrative officer versus what we're seeing, the actual numbers for the upcoming year. There's about a $300 million difference. You had 200 and 300. You're at 500 already. Then you throw in some labor agreements. It's just it is a train wreck. Whereas the city, as the Los Angeles Times said, the city is broke and it's their own doing. They just can't get out of their way, and this is something that's been going on for a long while. In 2019, there was a labor agreement that resulted in in huge deficits, and therefore there have been some tax increases, and there's a bunch of departments whose budgets have been cut. And one of the casualties, for example, are the police and fire departments. And as you're familiar with the fires they had over in the Pacific Palisades, if they had been better equipped over time, could they have made that a lot less? Would the damage been a lot less? I can't say that, but I think the people in the Palisades would tend to believe that if they had a bunch of fire engines over there that could have been financed with the budget as opposed to being cut, might not have been as bad. As it is, it's the Palisades is going to be a disaster area for the next 5 to 10 years. There are reports about all the toxics in the ground and how they should actually be taking up maybe a foot of dirt as opposed to 6 inches that the Army Corps of Engineers is talking about. But it's terrible. Now, my frustrations are, in addition to, the budget busting labor agreements, it's that the city hasn't taken any efforts to reform, we'll say reform, I'll say clean up its act. And the neighborhood council budget advocates have come up with a number of recommendations, 7 in particular, that have fallen on deaf ears at city council. I mean, we've been making them for a bunch of years, but one of them is to develop a 4-year budget forecast that is realistic and not fraudulent. And I use the word fraudulent advisedly. In these forecasts, they don't assume any new labor agreements. They just say, oh, everything's going to go hunky-dory. So Mayor Bass will go out there and tell us, oh, we're not going to have a structural deficit because in the 4th year we're showing a surplus. Well, yeah, that's you have 4 years of optimistic optimistic revenue projections. You have no labor costs, which are about 70 or 80% of the budget. No wonder you're going to be showing a surplus. When I did the numbers, and I did some, just some basic, not overly, I thought, run of the mill types of projections, $160 million surplus turned into a $300 million deficit in the fourth year. So you have some problems there. Another suggestion we've had is to have open and transparent labor negotiations. What they do now is they just go into, they go into the back room where with what they call the EERC, the Executive Employee Relations Committee, and they have negotiations that behind closed doors, and we have budget busting agreements that aren't done there. So I think we ought to have open and transparent labor negotiations, which would mean that the city would have to tell us what their goals are, give us updates during the labor negotiations, give us the final, tell us what the final results are, and then give us some time to digest this. And quite frankly, I think the other thing is they ought to have an independent review of it. And that would not be popular.
Let me ask you a quick question. Everything you are saying is legitimate. You've been very critical over the years of the LA city leaders, LA county leaders. You mentioned Mayor Bass a moment ago. Definitely some of the criticism is warranted. It's fair. You're not going to get an argument from me, no sir. Some of the criticism perhaps not, or at least according to your critics, they criticize you and they claim, Jack, he's a troublemaker. He's the watchdog. He's being unfair to local politicians, unfair to Mayor Bass, unfair to all the past mayors. What do you say to all that? Are you just a bad guy, a tough guy?
Well, this is a family-oriented channel. I would have a very simple response to that. But I agree that I've been somewhat of a critic, but I run the numbers. And having been, I'm a business school guy. I was an investment banker. We ran a small business. You sort of understand how the numbers work. And, I followed the city for probably 20 years now, give or take. And I guess my answer to that would be the hell with them.